Okay, Lee Santo out of the Teeks Firearms Range here again. We're going to continue our series talking about weapon safety and proper handling of firearms. Today we're going to cover several types of different weapon systems and how to check them to see if they're loaded or unloaded. I've got out here on the table in front of me, I'll pick them up as I talk about each one of them. I got a depiction of a revolver, a semi-automatic handgun, a semi-automatic rifle, and a pump shotgun. I'm using these because they're very common for what we do in our training environment out here, but they're also very commonly owned civilian weapons. The first one I'm going to talk about is a double action revolver. Now, it's important to know before I handle any of my firearms where the mechanisms are that control them and allow me to check them, open them to see if they're loaded or unloaded. Again, we follow our 4 safety rules. The number 1 rule being treat all firearms as if they're loaded all the time. Number 2 is not pointing the muzzle at anything we're not willing to destroy. Number 3 is keeping our finger off the trigger until our sights are on target and ready to shoot. And number 4 is be sure of our target and beyond. So we got to keep those 4 rules in mind when we're handling any firearm. So the first one I'm going to look at is a double action revolver. Before I pick it up, I make sure there's nothing there that I'm going to point the muzzle at that I'm not willing to destroy. All right, so I'm still treating it like it's loaded and keeping my finger off the trigger. Now, this particular weapon system has a cylinder that holds the ammunition. And I want to be able to open this so that I can look inside and either load it or unload it, but right now what we're doing is making sure that these weapons are unloaded. So if I'm looking at this gun and I'm just going to turn it over, I got a latch on the side of the frame here that I push forward to be able to open the cylinder. Once I push that latch forward, I push on the opposite side of the cylinder and it rotates out of the weapon. And now I can see when I'm looking down the cylinder that there's no round in the chamber, that there's no rounds in the cylinder, and that the weapon's unloaded. So I want to keep this weapon rendered safe for the moment. I'm going to leave the cylinder open so that I know, so I don't have to pick it up and open it again. So in that manner, I'll leave the cylinder open, but I'm still worried about where the muzzle of this thing's pointing. So I'll set it down and out of the way. And that's a very commonly carried type of weapon. Revolvers have been around for a long, long time, and there's a lot of them out there. This one works one way. The revolver you or somebody else might own might work a little bit differently, but you get the idea with that double action revolver that there's a way to open the cylinder mechanism and check it to see whether it's loaded or unloaded, and if I want to unload it, I can do it that way at the time. So I'm going to leave that sitting there open. The most commonly used type weapon system today, particularly in law enforcement, is a semi-automatic handgun. So with semi-automatic handguns, I need to know a little bit about where some of the controls on them so I can check them to see if they're unloaded. The big difference between the revolver I was just demonstrating and the semi-automatic handgun is the semi-automatic handgun has a box that holds all of the cartridges into the gun, and it's called a magazine. And I need to know how to remove that from the weapon because that's what feeds it. That's where the ammunition comes from that keeps it firing. So again, being aware of where the muzzle's pointed and keeping my finger off the trigger, I'm going to pick up this weapon and check it to make sure it's unloaded. Now, semi-automatic handgun again has that box that holds all the cartridges called a magazine. I need to be able to remove it. There is some mechanism on a semi-automatic handgun that I can push that allows me to remove that. And some of them, most semi-automatic handguns, it's in about the same place, but not all. So you need to be familiar with what type of weapon you're using to be able to remove it. On this particular one, the magazine release button is located on what would be the left side of the weapon, right in back of the trigger guard, and all I have to do is press that button. It releases the magazine, and I can remove the magazine from the weapon. Now looking at this magazine, I can see that it's unloaded. All right, the thing I want to do with that is set it to the side and out of the way. Okay, now Again, on this gun, there's something I need to be aware of. There is a lever on the side of it that's called a slide lock lever. The slide lock lever allows me to lock the slide open so that I can check to make sure the muzzle's clear. What I have to do is push up on that lever and pull back on the slide at the same time. So what I'm going to do here is use my finger to push up on it while I pull the slide to the rear, and then you can see that it causes the slide to lock open. Once the slide is locked open, it allows me to see down into the chamber where the back end of the barrel would be and make sure there's no cartridge in there. Once I've looked in there to make sure, again, magazine is removed, the slide is locked open, I look and see that there's no round in the chamber, and then I'm going to run my finger down there and do a physical inspection to make sure that this weapon is unloaded at this time. So now I know it's unloaded. I can leave it in this manner right here so that I don't have to pick it up and run the slide back again. So I'm just going to set that down and out of the way for the moment here. Another commonly used weapon both in law enforcement and in the civilian world is a pump shotgun. A lot of people grew up with pump shotguns. They use them for hunting ducks and geese and different birds. In law enforcement, it's also one of the weapons we train people to use. So I've got a depiction of that here today. This is a pump shotgun that we commonly use for training out here at Teagues. And again, finger off the trigger, muzzle pointed in a safe direction. All right, there's some mechanisms on here that I need to be aware of. The first one here is the safety. The safety button is at the back of the trigger guard. I want to make sure that that's sticking out to the right. So I run my hand behind the trigger guard and make sure it's pressed out. If it's pushed in and it's protruding from the left side, the safety isn't on. So I want to make sure the safety's on. Now I need to know where the controls are on my pump shotgun that allow me to open this up and check the chamber and make sure it's unloaded. Right before I do that though, it loads from the bottom into a magazine tube. Okay, so I can turn that over and look at that, pushing the loading gate out of the way, and check and make sure there's no rounds inside that magazine tube. So once I'm sure of that, then I need to know where the lever is that allows me to open this without having to manipulate the trigger. On this particular shotgun, that slide release is located right at the front of the trigger guard on the left side. So I'm going to press that, and as I press it, I'm going to retract the slide all the way back and leave it. Once I do that, it opens up the weapon so that I can see into it again and look into the back of the barrel, the chamber, and make sure there's no round in that chamber. And then once again, I can take my finger and run it inside there and make sure there's no round there, and then double check the magazine tube to make sure that I have no rounds in it. And again, still being aware of where I'm pointing the muzzle and keep my finger off the trigger, I can set this weapon system down and out of the way. The fourth weapon system I'm going to talk a little bit about is a semi-automatic rifle. Okay, this is a depiction again of one that we commonly use in law enforcement, and I need to know where all the controls are on this thing that will allow me to show that it is unloaded, prove it's unloaded. The first thing I'm going to look at is the safety, and I can see if it's on safe on the right side of this weapon because it has an indicator that points towards safe. So I can look and see. The actual safety lever is on the opposite side of the weapon, and I can see that it's pointing towards safe at this time. Now once I've done that, again, it's kind of like a semi-automatic handgun. It's got this thing in it, this box that feeds ammunition into it, that's called a magazine. I want to be able to remove that. So I need to know where the control is to do that. On this particular weapon system, the magazine release button is here just forward of the trigger and trigger guard assembly on the right side of the receiver. So I'm going to press that button and remove that magazine, and I can see that there's no ammunition in the magazine. I'm going to set it down and aside and out of the way. Now I need to open this up. There's a couple of controls here that I need to know where they're located so that I can do that, so I can get that accomplished. One is the charging handle, which is up here on the back of the weapon that retracts. When I pull the charging handle, it retracts the bolt back. And then I need to be able to lock the bolt open. If I roll it over a little bit, I can show you the bolt catch here. I'm going to push down on that as I pull the charging handle to the rear to lock the bolt open so I can see inside the weapon to make sure it's clear. So I lock that open, all right, push that back into place. Now I can see. I've removed the magazine, so the magazine well here is clear. I've locked the bolt to the rear. The safety's on. I can look down in the chamber and visually inspect the chamber to make sure there's no rounds in the chamber. And then again, I can do my physical inspection to make sure there's no ammunition in the weapon as well. So now I'm relatively secure in the fact that these are unloaded. However, we still follow the 4 safety rules. Again, treat it like it's loaded. Don't point the muzzle at anything I'm not willing to destroy. Keep my finger off the trigger unless I'm ready to shoot. And then be sure on my target and what's beyond. So that's a brief rundown on several common types of weapons: the revolver, the semi-automatic handgun, the pump shotgun, and the semi-automatic rifle. And that gives me the ability to check and see whether these weapons are loaded and unloaded, and if they are loaded, it would allow me to unload them.